My name is Olivia, and I'm 34 years old. Every morning, I take the same crowded bus downtown to the same gray office building, sit at the same small desk, and listen to the same people talk about things that never really matter. I work as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized insurance firm called Landon and Pierce Associates, the kind of place where people care more about gossip than growth. To them, I'm just quiet Olivia, the woman who keeps to herself, eats homemade lunches, and spends her breaks knitting. My little wicker knitting basket sits by my desk like a loyal friend. I keep it lined with soft blue fabric, my yarn neatly coiled, my needles polished and smooth. It's my peace, my little world away from theirs. But they never saw it that way. "Look at her," I heard one of them whisper once. "Is she knitting in the break room again? What is she, 80? The laughter that followed stung, though I smiled and pretended not to notice. Claire, the team's self-appointed queen bee, always led the pack. She wore red lipstick like armor and carried herself like she owned the place. She didn't need to say much, her smirk said everything. At first, their teasing was small, jokes about grandma hobbies, little comments when I walked by. But over time, it grew. Every day I could feel their eyes on me watching, mocking. Still, I didn't stop bringing my basket. Because while they saw yarn, I saw strategy. While they thought I was wasting time, I was building something. Inside that basket, beneath a false bottom I'd crafted from stiff fabric and cardboard, were printed trade reports, handwritten notes, and an old tablet I used for stock tracking. It wasn't just a basket, it was my mobile workstation. I'd learned long ago that people underestimate what they don't understand, so I let them laugh. During lunch breaks, while the others huddled together, gossiping about weekend plans or complaining about management, I'd slip in my earbuds, pretend to watch a tutorial, and quietly monitor my investments. My knitting motions masked the flick of my finger scrolling through stock data. The rhythm of knitting soothed me. Knit, purl, check the numbers. Knit, purl, watch the market shift. Each stitch felt like a step toward freedom. Sometimes I'd catch Claire's reflection in the computer screen, her curious eyes squinting at me. She'd whisper to the others, "Maybe she's actually knitting her own retirement fund." They'd laugh again. But if only they knew how close to the truth she was. My story didn't start here, though. 2 years earlier, I'd walked out of a 10-year marriage with nothing but debt and 2 suitcases. My ex-husband, Nathan, had told me I'd never make it on my own, that I was too soft, too trusting. He wasn't wrong, at least not back then. But I learned. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt my life. I worked extra hours, saved every dime, and spent sleepless nights studying finance videos and market patterns. I took notes on napkins, wrote down terms I didn't understand, and taught myself everything about stocks and trading. My hobby had become my weapon. The irony was that the same patience it took to knit a perfect scarf was the same patience the market demanded. Both required discipline, foresight, and timing. So every day at the office, while they mocked my needles and yarn, I knitted together my future one calculated move at a time. One Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, working on a pale gray scarf pattern while keeping an eye on a live stock ticker. The office buzzed with chatter. Claire and a few others gathered behind me, talking just loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe we should all start knitting," Claire said with a laugh. "Looks like Olivia's got the secret to eternal boredom." I smiled softly. "It's relaxing," I said without looking up. "You should try it." "Oh, honey," she chuckled. "I'd rather make money than mittens." If only she knew. As the hours dragged on, I finished my project and started packing up. That's when it happened. Claire brushed past my desk a little too close, her elbow accidentally knocking over my basket. Yarn rolled across the carpet. My needles clattered to the floor. And among the tangle of wool, a corner of something else peeked out, a folded printout labeled Investment Portfolio Summary. Claire froze. Her eyes flicked from the paper to my face, her smirk fading into confusion. I quietly bent down, gathered my things, and tucked the paper back beneath the yarn. "Careful," I said evenly. looking her dead in the eye. Some threads are stronger than they look. She didn't know what to say. The laughter around her died. For the first time, Claire seemed unsure. And that was the moment everything began to change. When Claire peeked into my basket, her laughter stopped, replaced by confusion and fear. The next morning, Claire wouldn't even look at me. That alone was strange. She always made a point to make eye contact, to smirk, to remind me she was in control of every social current in that office. But after she saw that printout yesterday, her usual confidence seemed rattled. I could feel her glancing my way during the morning meeting. Her curiosity burned like static in the air. Every time I adjusted my basket beside my desk, I saw her reflection in the computer screen, pretending not to watch. When the lunch bell rang, the others headed to the break room. I stayed behind as usual, pulling out my knitting and my tablet hidden beneath the yarn. The moment the door shut behind them, I switched on the screen. Rows of numbers and charts filled the display, red and green lines climbing and dipping like waves. I had positions in 3 companies at that moment: a tech startup, a renewable energy firm, and a pharmaceutical company with a promising new treatment on the horizon. Each move calculated, each investment made with precision. I wasn't just trading stocks, I was weaving my independence. One careful decision at a time. But I didn't know Claire had returned to her desk early. I felt her shadow before I saw her. She was standing right behind me, pretending to look for a stapler on the shared shelf. My pulse quickened. I casually tilted the tablet screen down, hiding the graphs. "What are you working on?" she asked. Her tone sugar-sweet, but her eyes sharp. "Just checking a pattern," I said, lifting a ball of yarn. "A cable stitch." She tilted her head. "Huh. I didn't know knitting came with stock charts." The air went cold. I didn't look up. "You must have seen wrong." She leaned closer. "Maybe. Or maybe you're not as boring as we thought." Then she smiled, that smile that always meant trouble, and walked away. I exhaled slowly. I'd worked too hard to let someone like Claire ruin it. That night at home, I locked my door and set my tablet on the kitchen table. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a narrow balcony, the faint hum of traffic outside. But it was mine. Paid for with my own effort. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and opened my old leather notebook, filled with handwritten notes and printouts. Charts, market analyses, dividend records, years of quiet study. I'd built a portfolio worth over $250,000 from an initial $8,000 I'd saved after my divorce. No one had helped me. No one had even believed in me. I looked at a photo pinned to my fridge, my ex-husband Nathan, in his expensive suit, standing beside his new girlfriend. I didn't feel hatred anymore. Just distance. "You said I'd never make it," I whispered, setting down my teacup. "But you were wrong." My phone buzzed. It was a notification one of my energy stocks had surged 18% in a single day. I smiled. Every small victory mattered. The next morning, when I walked into the office, I noticed something odd. The whispers had started again, but this time, they were quieter, more uncertain. I could feel the shift. Claire had said something. In the break room, I caught fragments of conversation. Claire said Olivia's into trading or something? Trading? Like stocks? No way, she probably just watches tutorials. She had some finance papers in her basket. Claire saw them. So the story had spread. But that was fine. Let them speculate. Let them wonder. That afternoon, Claire stopped by my desk again, holding a cup of coffee. "Hey, Olivia," she said, her tone falsely friendly. "You know, I didn't realize you were into business stuff. I mean, stocks and all that." I looked up from my knitting. "It's just a hobby," I said softly. She smiled tightly. "Of course. A hobby." She lingered a second longer than necessary, then walked off. After she left, I stared at my screen. I could feel the tide turning, though I didn't yet know which direction it would go. At home that night, I logged into my online trading platform again. The numbers looked good. My positions were strong. I'd learned how to play the long game: patience, precision, silence. Still, Claire's curiosity worried me. She wasn't the type to let something go. I opened my knitting notes app, which actually hid my trading records, and made a note to move some documents to a secure drive. I couldn't afford to have anyone snooping. As I worked, my phone buzzed again, a message from Mrs. Callahan, my elderly neighbor and the only person who knew my secret. "How's your portfolio doing, dear? Did the energy stock rise like you predicted?" I smiled and typed back, "It did. And thank you again for the cookies." Mrs. Callahan had been my first student. I'd taught her how to manage her savings, how to invest safely. She was proof that quiet persistence paid off. But as I put down my phone, I had a feeling, a prickle at the back of my neck, that Claire wasn't done. And I was right, because the next day, she didn't come to work on time. She was outside, waiting, watching where I went after hours. I saw Claire's reflection in the window, tailing me like I was a criminal. I'd always believed in routine. Same bus, same seat, same cup of coffee from the corner shop downstairs. Predictability gave me comfort. But that Thursday evening, as I walked from the office toward the small cafe where I usually worked on my trades, something felt off. You learn to sense when someone's eyes are on you, a subtle tightening in the air, a shift in your pulse. I glanced at the glass storefront beside me and saw a familiar reflection behind mine. Claire. She was pretending to scroll through her phone, her sunglasses still perched on top of her head despite the sun setting. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement, pretending not to notice. But inside, my mind was already calculating. Claire was curious, maybe even desperate. I'd seen that look before, the kind people get when they realize someone they've underestimated might actually be ahead of them. I entered Cafe Indigo, a quiet place tucked between a bookstore and a florist. The barista, Janelle, smiled as I walked in. "The usual, Olivia?" "Please," I said, taking my seat by the window. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my basket, not from fear, but from focus. Beneath the yarn sat my small tablet. I powered it on, the screen lighting up with market charts and figures. My energy stock had dipped slightly, but the tech startup was up 6%. I smiled faintly. The market was like knitting: one misstep could unravel everything, but if you kept your rhythm steady, the pattern held. The doorbell jingled behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Claire. Her perfume, something sharp and citrusy, reached me before her voice did. She ordered a coffee and sat a few tables away, pretending to read a magazine. Her reflection glinted in the glass. She wasn't here for caffeine. A few minutes later, Mrs. Callahan arrived, her cane tapping lightly against the tile. Her silver hair was neatly pinned up, her smile warm as always. "Hello, dear," she greeted. "I hope I'm not late." "Not at all," I said, relieved to see her. We met once a week to review her portfolio. She'd been nervous about investing her small savings after her husband passed, but under my guidance, she'd grown it steadily. I liked helping her. It made me feel like all my late nights and study sessions had a purpose beyond myself. "Let's look at your dividends," I said, sliding my tablet toward her. As we talked softly about percentages and returns, I noticed Claire pretending to read, but her eyes flicked toward us over and over. Her curiosity was practically vibrating off her. "Mrs. Callahan leaned closer and whispered, "Is that the woman who always stares at you in the office?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, she's persistent." Mrs. Callahan chuckled. "Envy looks the same at any age, darling. Don't let her rattle you." I nodded, but part of me wondered what Claire would do with whatever story she thought she was uncovering. After about an hour, Mrs. Callahan left, her cane tapping cheerfully toward the door. I stayed behind to finish my notes. When I finally packed my things and stepped outside, the evening air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. I glanced down the street, and there she was again, Claire. Pretending to talk on her phone, but following just far enough behind to be coincidental. I stopped at the corner light, waiting for it to turn green. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. If she wanted to see what I was doing, fine, let her, she'd get a show. I turned down a different street than usual, leading her to believe I was heading somewhere secret. The truth was, I wanted to know how far she'd go. I entered a small bookstore and walked toward the back. Through the reflection in the window, I saw her standing outside, pretending to browse a rack of postcards. A minute later, I stepped out again and locked eyes with her. "Lose something, Claire?" I asked lightly. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Oh, Olivia, fancy seeing you here. I was just following me?" Her cheeks flushed. "What? No. I thought maybe we could grab dinner or something. Get to know each other." "Dinner," I repeated, studying her expression. "That's new." She forced a laugh. "I just think it's weird you're always alone. Maybe you could use a friend." I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "Maybe I could, but not the kind that follows me after work." I brushed past her and started walking away. I didn't need to look back to know she was watching me silent, angry, confused. By the time I got home, I was exhausted but calm. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and reviewed the numbers again. The markets didn't care about office politics or gossip. They only cared about patience and timing, and I had both. But as I sipped my tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire wasn't finished. She'd seen enough to know something was hidden beneath the surface, but not enough to understand what it was. And people like her? They never stopped until they got answers. I stared at the flickering candle beside my window and whispered to myself, "If she wants to dig, let her. Just remember, Claire, not every thread you pull unravels cleanly." The next morning, she'd prove just how right I was. In the middle of the office, Claire grabbed my basket and dumped it out. The next morning began like any other, or so I thought. The fluorescent lights hummed, the printer jammed, and the same stale smell of burnt coffee filled the air. I took my usual seat at my desk, set down my basket, and started my day. But there was something in the air, a tension, faint but unmistakable. Conversations hushed when I passed by. Whispers rose when I sat down. Claire was unusually quiet that morning. Too quiet. She'd been watching me since the moment I walked in, her bright smile stretched too wide, too polished. The kind of smile that hides something sharp behind it. I should have trusted my gut. Around noon, while most of the team gathered in the break room for lunch, Claire strutted toward my desk. Her heels clicked across the carpet like warning drums. I was on a call with a client, my headset on, when she stopped right beside me. "Olivia," she said sweetly, "can I borrow your stapler?" Without waiting for my answer, she reached past me, not for the stapler, but for my knitting basket. It happened so fast I couldn't stop her. In one swift motion, she snatched it off the floor and flipped it upside down. The sound of yarn rolling across the carpet was followed by laughter. Loud, cruel laughter. Blue, pink, and gray yarn scattered everywhere. My needles clattering like coins on tile. But among the mess, something else slipped free. Folded papers, printouts, and a small leather notebook. The laughter faltered. Claire crouched down, her fingers brushing against the papers. "What's this?" she asked, voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Investment reports? Stock charts?" She held up one of the printouts, reading aloud. "Quarterly dividends? Market returns?" Wow. Grandma Olivia's got herself a Wall Street hobby. The office erupted again. But this time, it sounded unsure, forced, awkward. I could feel the shift. Half of them were laughing. The other half were wondering what exactly they were seeing. I took a slow breath, ending my call. Then I turned in my chair and looked at her, really looked at her. Claire's eyes were bright, but her hands trembled just slightly. "Done?" I asked quietly. Her smirk faltered. "I just thought Everyone should see what you're really working on during company hours. I stood, brushing imaginary dust off my skirt. You thought humiliating me would make you feel bigger? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through steel. A few coworkers looked away, uncomfortable. Claire's voice wavered. Don't act innocent. You've been hiding things in there. I bent down, carefully gathering my yarn and papers. You're right, I said softly. I have been hiding something. She blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? I met her gaze calm, steady. It's called self-respect. The room went utterly still. A few quiet snickers escaped from the desks behind her, but they weren't directed at me anymore. Claire's cheeks flushed pink. I gathered the last of my papers, folded them neatly, and set the basket back on my desk. My hands didn't shake. I refused to give her the satisfaction. Then I smiled just barely. You should be careful, Claire. You never know what someone might be capable of. She scoffed and turned away, muttering something under her breath, but the damage was done not to me, to her. Her performance hadn't gone the way she expected. The laughter had died faster than it began, leaving only a strange, quiet hum of guilt and confusion in its place. For the rest of the day, no one said a word to me. I went about my work as usual, knitting a few rows during lunch, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, something solidified, a cold, deliberate resolve. I'd spent years letting people mock me, years pretending not to notice when they whispered or laughed. But that afternoon, as I watched Claire retreat to her desk, still red-faced and jittery, I made a decision. I wasn't going to react emotionally. I wasn't going to beg for respect or try to explain myself. I would let my results speak for me, because the truth was, while Claire thought she'd exposed me, she had no idea what I was really hiding. I had spent months preparing for something much bigger, something that would change everything about this company, and about me. That evening, as the office emptied and I sat alone under the dim light of my desk lamp, my phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen, an encrypted message from my investment group. It's time. The buyout papers are ready. My fingers tightened around the phone. All the humiliation, the laughter, the whispers, they had no idea they'd just handed me the perfect moment. Let them laugh. Let them mock. By the time they realized who I really was, it would be far too late. While they mocked my knitting, I was knitting together their future without them. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my small kitchen table, the glow of my laptop casting pale light across my half-finished scarf. The yarn coiled around my fingers, steady and rhythmic, as my other hand clicked through stock data and messages from my private investor group. The message that had come earlier still pulsed on the screen. It's time. The buyout papers are ready. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of every choice that had brought me here. Every late night studying finance after my divorce, every cruel laugh I'd swallowed at work, every stitch I'd made in silence. People saw a woman knitting to pass the time. They didn't see that I was weaving control, one investment at a time. My investor group was small, just 6 of us. I'd met them on a financial literacy forum 3 years ago. Women like me, all underestimated, all tired of being told they weren't capable. There was Marianne, a retired nurse, Tanya, a single mom who worked in accounting, Rosa, a teacher with a passion for numbers, and Deborah, a widow who'd once been scammed out of her savings. I'd taught them everything I knew: how to study a balance sheet, how to spot manipulation, how to invest smartly. Together, we'd built something solid. And now, we were ready to make our move. The company I worked for, Landon and Pierce, was struggling. Not that the executives admitted it, but I saw the numbers. The quiet layoffs, the shrinking bonuses, the hushed meetings behind closed doors. It was all in the filings if you knew where to look, and I'd been looking. We'd been buying shares quietly for months, piece by piece, under different names and through various platforms, small amounts, nothing flashy. But now, together, we held nearly 30% of the company's stock, enough to demand attention, and with the right leverage, control. As the night deepened, I called the group's secure line. "Everyone ready?" I asked. My voice calm despite the adrenaline pulsing beneath it. "Yes," Marianne said first. "Are you sure this will work?" "It will," I said firmly. "We're not doing anything illegal. We're just doing what men have done forever, seeing opportunity where others see chaos." They laughed softly, their nervous energy matching mine. Rosa said, "I still can't believe it. You were knitting during our first meeting." I smiled faintly. "Still am." I could hear the clicking of my needles through the speaker, steady and sure. The rhythm grounded me. While the market fluctuated, the yarn never lied. It was simple, structured, obedient to patience. When the call ended, I set my knitting aside and opened the document folder labeled Project Loom, our code name for the takeover. It detailed every step, every filing, every possible reaction. We'd consulted legal experts anonymously through encrypted forums, making sure every move was above board. My mind drifted to the office, to Claire, to her smug grin, to the laughter that still echoed faintly in my ears. I felt no rage anymore, just resolve. While she mocked my knitting, I'd been knitting her future and she didn't even know it. Around midnight, I received another message from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Donahue would like to meet. 9 a.m. tomorrow. His office. Come alone." Mr. Donahue, the CEO himself. My heart skipped. He must have noticed the sudden surge of quiet buying. The filings were public after all, and my name had likely shown up somewhere it wasn't supposed to. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. So, the king had noticed the spider in his web. The next morning, I dressed carefully, a navy blouse, tailored pants, minimal makeup, confidence, not arrogance. When I arrived at the building, I could feel the stares. Whispers had spread since yesterday's basket incident. Claire shot me a sharp glance when I passed her desk. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked straight past and up the stairs to the executive floor. Mr. Donahue's assistant ushered me in almost immediately. The office smelled like leather and coffee, expensive, masculine, sterile. He was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression unreadable. "Olivia," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I assume you know why I asked you here." "I have a few ideas," I replied evenly. He leaned back, his fingers steepled. "I've been reviewing some recent shareholder movements. Your name came up more than once. Care to explain why a mid-level assistant has acquired this much interest in my company?" My pulse quickened, but I kept my tone soft. "Just a hobby, sir. Like my knitting." His eyes narrowed, studying me. Then he smiled faintly, not kindly. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Maybe," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I'm very good at it." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Be careful where you place your bets, Olivia. Some threads aren't meant to be pulled." I smiled slightly. "With all due respect, Mr. Donahue, that depends on who's holding the yarn." His jaw tightened, and I knew he understood the message. I wasn't bluffing. When I walked out of that office, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked woman in the corner. I was the one making the moves. By the time I reached my desk, Claire's mocking glance had turned into curiosity, maybe even fear. She had no idea that by the time the next quarter rolled around, I wouldn't just be her coworker anymore. I'd be her boss. Mr. Donahue called me into his office, and that was the moment I knew he was scared. I didn't expect to be summoned again so soon. 2 days after that tense meeting, Mr. Donahue called me into his office. "Enter down." Donahue's assistant appeared beside my cubicle with a polite but urgent smile. "Mr. Donahue would like to see you again, Olivia. Right now." Every head turned. Even the clicking of keyboards stopped. Claire froze mid-sentence, her eyes darting from me to the elevator, trying to piece together why the CEO of a 40-year-old, Company would call me up twice in 1 week. I gathered my things calmly, adjusted my cardigan, and walked past her without a word. The whispers started almost instantly, like a ripple through still water. When I stepped into his office, the air felt heavier than before. Mr. Donahue didn't stand this time. He sat at his desk, sleeves rolled up. His tie loosened a man who hadn't slept much. Papers were scattered across his desk, highlighted in angry yellow streaks. "Close the door," he said. I obeyed. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I did some digging after our last conversation. You've been very busy, haven't you?" I didn't flinch. "I like to stay productive. Don't get clever with me," he snapped, then sighed, his tone softening. "Look, Olivia, I'm not here to threaten you. I just need to know what your endgame is. You've accumulated a significant amount of shares enough to make certain people nervous. Should they be?" I asked lightly. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That depends on what you want." What I wanted. The question hung in the air like static. For a moment, I thought of how small I used to feel hunched behind that desk. Ignored, invisible. I thought of Nathan's voice telling me I'd never make it. I thought of Claire's smirk as she dumped out my basket. What did I want? Control, respect, justice, maybe. "I want stability," I said finally. "This company is sinking. Mr. Donahue, the signs are everywhere. I'm investing in what could be its rebirth." He tilted his head. "Rebirth? Or takeover?" I didn't answer. Silence can be more powerful than any confession. He leaned back, folding his hands. "You're clever, I'll give you that, but clever people sometimes forget their place. I built this company from nothing." "With respect, sir," I said quietly, "you built it 40 years ago. The world's changed. Maybe it's time for new hands to hold the thread." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. For a second, I thought he might yell, but instead, he smiled. The kind of smile that hides a storm. "Be careful, Olivia," he said. "If you keep tugging, you might unravel something you can't fix." I nodded politely, then left his office, my heart pounding but my face serene. When the elevator doors opened back onto my floor, the entire room fell silent again. Claire's expression was unreadable, a mix of suspicion and unease. "What did he want?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "Just some advice," I said with a faint smile. "He's a little tangled up." Her brow furrowed. "Advice? From you?" "Apparently, yes." I sat down, opened my emails, and began typing, ignoring the burning stare she fixed on me. Inside, my pulse was racing. Because I knew exactly what Donahue's next move would be. He'd try to dig into my finances, find something to use against me. But he wouldn't find anything. Every account, every trade, every transaction, all clean, all protected. That evening, after work, I returned home and opened my secure chat with my investor group. "Olivia, he's nervous. We have his attention. Tanya, should we pause the buys? Olivia, no. Keep going, small increments only. He'll expect hesitation. Let's give him confidence before we pull it away." I could almost hear their excitement through the screen. For us, this wasn't just business, it was redemption. Proof that women dismissed as small or quiet could build empires in silence. But while I strategized, another storm was brewing. The next morning, Claire walked into the office unusually early. She'd brought coffee for everyone, something she'd never done before. Her voice was bright, cheerful, fake, the calm before her next stunt. By lunch, my gut told me something was wrong. When I returned from the restroom, there was an envelope on my desk. Inside was a folded piece of paper, typed neatly. "They're planning to lay you off next week. Confidential." No sender, no signature. Just those words. For a few seconds I stared at it, my hands trembling. It could have been a lie, a scare tactic. Or it could have been the truth. Either way, it didn't matter. They thought they could push me out quietly, erase me before I became a problem. But what they didn't realize was that they were already too late. The web had been spun, the stitches were tight, and if they wanted to pull this thread, I'd make sure the whole company unraveled with it. The pink slip was waiting on my desk before I even clocked in. The office felt colder that Monday morning, not in temperature but in tone. You can always tell when something's off before anyone says a word. The air gets thicker, tighter. Eyes linger longer. Conversations stop when you walk by. I stepped out of the elevator, clutching my basket as usual, and immediately noticed the thin envelope resting on my desk. My name, Olivia Hart, typed neatly across the front. My stomach dropped. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. Still, I tore it open. Effective immediately. Your position has been eliminated due to departmental restructuring. We thank you for your service and wish you the best in your future endeavors. No signature from Mr. Donahue. Just human resources boilerplate. I sat down, staring at the words. Around me, the office hummed with artificial normalcy, phones ringing, keyboards clattering, but I could feel the eyes. People pretending to work while sneaking glances. Then came Claire's voice, soft and dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Olivia, I just heard. That's so awful. If there's anything I can do," I looked up slowly. "You've done enough, Claire." Her smirk flickered for just a second, like a flame caught in wind. "Well, you know how it is. Budget cuts, nothing personal. Nothing ever is," I said, folding the paper neatly. "Until it becomes personal." I packed my basket quietly. My yarn, my needles, my notebook, and one last look at the desk I'd sat at for years. Claire lingered nearby, pretending to chat with another coworker but clearly watching. I could have lashed out. I could have exposed her cruelty, her games. But that wasn't my way. I didn't need to fight in public. My revenge was already in motion. As I walked out of the office for the last time, the elevator doors reflected my face, calm, unreadable. To everyone else, it looked like defeat. But to me, it felt like freedom. Outside, the city air hit my face, cool and sharp. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. They thought they'd ended my story. They had no idea they'd just triggered the final act. That afternoon, I met my investor group online. The 6 of us appeared in tiny squares on the screen, tired, determined, and fiercely united. "Marianne, you okay, Olivia?" We saw the filing. They actually did it. Olivia. Yes. They made their move. Now we make ours. I pulled up the stock dashboard. Landon and Pierce's shares were down 8% since last week. Rumors of layoffs were spreading. The timing was perfect. I leaned closer to the screen, my voice steady. "Buy everything you can. Today, tomorrow, the next day. Small increments. No panic, no spikes. We keep it quiet. When they think they've erased me, we'll own them." Each woman nodded, determination lighting their faces. It was no longer about revenge alone, it was about proving what we were capable of. That evening, I sat by my window, the city lights glowing in the distance. My knitting lay across my lap, soft gray wool gliding between my fingers. Every stitch was a meditation, a reminder to stay patient. I was building something lasting, stronger than any career title, stronger than any insult. I thought about Mr. Donahue's warning, "Be careful what you pull." I smiled faintly. He was right about one thing. I had pulled something powerful, and I wasn't stopping now. By the end of the week, the company's internal panic became public. Word leaked that several departments had been dissolved, morale was collapsing, and longtime clients were pulling contracts. The stock price dropped further, and I was buying every single dip. Late one night, I received a message from an anonymous account, no name, no greeting, just a single line. "You're making waves, Miss Hart. Let's talk." Attached was a calendar link, a meeting request from none other than Mr. Donahue. The irony made me laugh. 2 weeks ago, I was disposable. Now, I was dangerous enough to summon again. I confirmed the meeting for the following morning. When I showed up, The receptionist avoided my eyes. Donahue greeted me with forced politeness, motioning for me to sit. "Olivia," he said, clasping his hands. "I think we may have misunderstood each other." I raised an eyebrow. "I think you understood perfectly." He sighed. "You're playing a very risky game." "No," I said calmly. "I'm playing a strategic one." He leaned back, studying me with a mix of irritation and admiration. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, I do," I said, standing. "You're dealing with the consequences of underestimating me." As I walked out of his office, I could feel his eyes on me, wary now, not dismissive. By the end of that week, I wasn't just an ex-employee. I was the company's largest individual shareholder, and I hadn't even started yet. When I walked back into the office, the laughter had stopped. It had been exactly 10 days since I was escorted out of Landon and Pierce with my knitting basket in hand. 10 days since Claire's smug smile followed me all the way to the elevator. 10 days since I'd vowed, silently and completely, that I'd never walk through those doors as an employee again. And I didn't. I walked back in as an owner. The elevator ride up to the executive floor felt surreal. My reflection in the mirrored panel looked calm, but beneath the surface, my pulse thrummed like a drumbeat. My investor group had done it. We'd quietly finalized our purchase through multiple brokers, buying up shares while the company's value dipped further into panic. As of 8 a.m. that morning, I held controlling interest. I adjusted my blazer and took a slow breath. No badge, no escort, just me, the new majority shareholder. When the elevator doors opened, the noise of the office died instantly. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. It was like watching the moment a storm cloud blots out the sun, swift, shocking, absolute. Claire was the first to see me. Her jaw dropped. "Olivia?" she whispered. "What are you doing here?" I smiled politely. "Just stopping by. I had some business to discuss." She blinked, confused. "You don't work here anymore." "You're right," I said, walking past her desk. "I don't." I could feel the stares following me, whispers growing louder as I crossed the room and headed straight for the glass-walled office at the end of the corridor. Donahue's door was closed, but the blinds were open. He looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across his face before he quickly masked it. "Miss Hart," he said carefully. "What a surprise." "Not really," I replied, setting a manila envelope on his desk. "You've been expecting me." He glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. "You've made quite an impression on the market. Your name's come up in more meetings than you might realize." "I'd imagine so," I said. "It's not every day one of your former employees becomes your majority shareholder." The color drained from his face. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." I slid the folder toward him. "These are the final filings. Between my own portfolio and the holdings of my partners, we now control 52.3% of Landon and Pierce's stock." For a long moment, he said nothing. His fingers hovered over the papers as if touching them would make the numbers disappear. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "I assure you, I'm very serious." The silence between us stretched. Outside his office window, I could see faces gathering, trying to glimpse what was happening. Finally, he exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "What do you want, Olivia?" "Transparency," I said, "accountability, and a seat at the table." He gave a bitter laugh. "You really think you can just—" "I don't think," I interrupted softly. "I know." There was something deeply satisfying in watching the realization dawn on him. This wasn't an impulsive act of revenge. This was strategy, patience, a long game perfectly played. He stood, his voice low. "You could destroy this company," I met his gaze, "or I could save it." The conversation ended there. I left him staring at the papers, his authority unraveling thread by thread. When I stepped back into the main floor, the entire office fell silent again. I walked calmly toward Claire's desk, her wide eyes filled with disbelief. "I thought you got fired," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I did," I replied. "Then I bought the company." Her face turned pale. "You're joking." I smiled faintly. "Do I look like I'm joking?" She didn't answer. I leaned closer, my voice soft but steady. "You once told me you'd rather make money than mittens. Congratulations, Claire. You're about to help me do both." The whispers around us swelled, but I didn't linger. I walked straight out of the open office and into the corridor where my steps echoed like punctuation marks at the end of an old chapter. Back in Donahue's office, I could hear muffled phone calls, frantic voices trying to make sense of what had just happened. By the end of the day, every department would know. The woman they mocked, the grandma with the yarn, had quietly taken control of the company they thought owned her. But I wasn't here for petty revenge. I was here to rebuild. That evening, as I sat at home knitting by the window, my phone buzzed with messages from reporters and investors. The story was spreading fast. Mysterious female investor takes over struggling insurance firm. I smiled to myself, looping another stitch. The rhythm felt different now, steady, powerful, grounded. I didn't need applause or validation. I had something far more satisfying. Control. The next morning, a courier arrived at my door with an embossed envelope. Inside was a single line written on company letterhead, signed by Donahue himself. "We need to discuss the transition. Tomorrow, my office." I folded the note and set it beside my knitting basket. The yarn rested quietly, soft and obedient the same way they'd once thought I was. But tomorrow, they'd see what real power looked like. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted transformation. When I walked into Mr. Donahue's office the next morning, the atmosphere was entirely different. The last time I'd stood here, I was a threat he thought he could control. Now, I was the majority shareholder, the person he had to answer to. He didn't greet me right away. He was standing by the window, staring out at the skyline as if the view could offer him some kind of escape. When he finally turned, the exhaustion in his eyes was unmistakable. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight, "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Suppose?" I asked lightly, taking a seat. "You sound like a man who's still in denial." He exhaled through his nose. "You've made your point. You're smart. You're resourceful. You outplayed us all. But what's next? What do you actually want from this company?" I paused. It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself for years without realizing it. For so long, my life had revolved around surviving. Hiding my ambition behind yarn and politeness. But sitting across from Donahue now, I realized this was about more than revenge. "I don't want to destroy this place," I said finally. "I want to rebuild it. I want to turn it into a company that values people, not just profits. I want to make it fair." He raised an eyebrow. "Fair? This isn't a charity, Olivia." "No," I said calmly, "but it could be a legacy." He studied me for a long moment. There was skepticism in his eyes, but also something else, reluctant respect. He'd spent decades dealing with sharks and opportunists. What confused him now was that I didn't fit either mold. Finally, he said, "You have ideas then?" "Dozens," I replied, sliding a folder across his desk. "New client strategies, modern tech adoption, employee ownership options, all designed to cut waste and improve morale. I've done my homework." He didn't open the folder. "You realize most takeovers end in chaos, don't you?" "I'm not here to create chaos," I said. "I'm here to create change." He sat down slowly, rubbing his temple. "You sound like every idealist I've ever fired." "And yet," I said softly, "you can't fire me." That broke the tension. He chuckled, not kindly but genuinely. "Point taken." We spent the next hour reviewing the transition plan. He didn't fight me. He negotiated, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with genuine curiosity. He'd built this company from the ground up. I could respect that. I didn't want to erase his legacy. I wanted to evolve it. When I left his office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt focused, empowered. The elevator doors opened to the main floor, and for the first time, I saw something in my coworker's eyes that hadn't been there before: respect. Even Claire looked unsettled. She didn't speak when I passed her desk. I sat down at my old spot, unpacked my knitting basket, and placed it neatly beside me. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The same basket they'd mocked was now sitting beside the company's new leader. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my notebook and began working. By mid-afternoon, the internal announcement went out. Effective immediately, Olivia Hart has assumed controlling interest and will be joining the executive board as acting director of strategic development. The reaction was immediate stunned silence, then a hum of disbelief. Claire's whisper carried across the room, sharp as glass. She actually did it. I glanced up briefly, meeting her gaze. I told you some threads are stronger than they look. She turned away, her cheeks flushed. But I wasn't angry anymore. Her cruelty had been the spark I needed to ignite my transformation. Without her mockery, I might still be quietly knitting, scarves on my lunch break, hiding who I really was. That evening, I sat by the window in my apartment, the city glowing beneath me. My investor group had sent messages of celebration, all of them thanking me, calling me brave, brilliant, relentless. But bravery wasn't what this was. It was clarity. I looked at my reflection in the glass and whispered, it was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. I picked up my knitting again, soft white yarn this time, the color of clean slates. With each stitch, I thought about what came next. Mentoring, expanding, transforming this company from the inside out. By the end of the week, the board would vote on my new proposals. But before that, there was something else I had to do. Something unfinished. The next morning, Claire knocked on my new office door. She looked nervous, clutching a file to her chest. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I gestured for her to come in. "Of course. Close the door." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I owe you an apology. And maybe I need your help." I looked at her for a long moment. The past and present colliding like two worlds meeting in the middle. She wasn't the enemy anymore. She was the lesson. And soon, she'd be part of the transformation I was building. The announcement hit the company like a thunderclap. The morning the announcement went public, the whole office felt like it had been struck by lightning. Emails flew, phones rang non-stop. The company intranet was flooded with disbelief. "Did you see this? She owns the company now." "Wait, the knitting lady?" It was chaos wrapped in awe. By 9 a.m., the entire staff had been summoned to the main conference room for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy, a mix of fear, curiosity, and reluctant admiration. I stood near the back for a moment, watching everyone file in. For years, I had been invisible in this place, a background extra in someone else's story. Now, every pair of eyes searched for me. When Mr. Donahue entered, the murmurs died instantly. He looked exhausted but composed, that same guarded authority clinging to him out of habit. He cleared his throat and faced the crowd. "Everyone," he began, "as you've probably heard, there have been some changes in ownership. I'll make this simple. As of this morning, Miss Olivia Hart is the new majority shareholder of Landon and Pierce." A ripple of shock tore through the room. Some gasped, others turned to look at me. Claire's mouth fell open. Donahue continued, his tone strained but civil. "I'll be stepping down as CEO effective immediately. Miss Hart will assume interim leadership while the board formalizes her position." He paused, glanced at me, and gestured subtly for me to come forward. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I didn't hesitate. I walked to the front of the room, the sound of my heels echoing off the polished floor. The same faces that had once laughed at me now watched in silence. Some were wary, others curious. A few even smiled faintly, as if realizing how wrong they'd been. "Good morning," I began softly. "I know this is unexpected. Believe me, it is for me too." A small laugh rippled through the room, breaking the tension. I continued. "I started here 8 years ago as an administrative assistant. I was quiet. I kept my head down. And if I'm honest, I let myself believe that was all I'd ever be. But something changed. I realized that being underestimated can be a powerful advantage if you know how to use it. I glanced around the room, meeting familiar eyes, the ones that had mocked me, ignored me, dismissed me. I've spent the last few years studying this business, learning everything I could, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to build something better. Landon and Pierce has a legacy worth saving, but it needs to evolve. And that starts today. Claire shifted in her seat, fidgeting with a pen. I caught her eye for a brief moment, offering the faintest nod. I outlined my plans: restructuring teams to focus on efficiency, implementing transparent leadership, and my proudest initiative, launching an employee investment program, allowing staff to own shares in the company. From now on, I said, this company will grow through fairness and innovation, not fear and control. No one should feel invisible here, not ever again. For a moment, silence. Then, unexpectedly, applause, hesitant at first, then louder, swelling until the entire room joined in. I didn't smile immediately. I just stood there, feeling the sound wash over me like something cleansing. After years of laughter at my expense, their applause didn't feel like validation. It felt like acknowledgement. When the meeting ended, people approached me one by one, some congratulating, others apologizing. I accepted both with grace. Claire lingered behind the crowd, hesitating. Finally she approached, her voice quiet. You really did it, didn't you? I told you once, I said. Some threads are stronger than they look. Her lips pressed into a small, sincere smile. Guess I should have been paying attention. Maybe, I said gently. But it's not too late. I offered her a card, an invitation to my new initiative. I'm building a financial education program for women inside the company. I could use someone with your people skills. She blinked, stunned. You'd trust me with that? I'd rather turn an enemy into an ally than waste potential. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Olivia. As she walked away, I finally exhaled, feeling something uncoil inside me, not vengeance but peace. Later that afternoon, I sat in my new office, the one that used to belong to Donahue, surrounded by boxes of reports and a single familiar object on the desk. My knitting basket. The same basket that had once been a joke was now a symbol of everything I'd built. I reached inside and pulled out my half-finished scarf, running the yarn through my fingers. Each loop was a memory, every humiliation, every late-night trade, every moment I doubted myself. All of it had led here. I picked up my needles and smiled. Let them laugh, I murmured. They'll never understand the patience it takes to build something that lasts. Outside, the office buzzed with new energy. The laughter was different now, not mocking, but hopeful. And for the first time, I felt like I was home. Claire's voice trembled, but it wasn't an apology I expected. The following week, the office atmosphere shifted completely. Gone was the tension that used to choke the air. People moved with a kind of cautious optimism, curious about what this new version of Landon and Pierce would become under my leadership. But for me, the noise faded into the background. The moment I saw Claire standing outside my office door, clutching a folder to her chest, she looked different, smaller somehow. Not in stature, but in spirit. Come in, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She hesitated before stepping forward. Thanks, she murmured, closing the door behind her. Her voice was soft, uncertain, so unlike the confident tone she used to wield like a weapon. I studied her quietly for a moment. What can I do for you, Claire? She swallowed hard. I need to say something. And it's not easy. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands. Go on. Her eyes darted to the window before she finally met mine. I was awful to you. I mocked you. I made fun of your knitting, your clothes, your quietness, all of it. And the worst part is, I did it because I was jealous. You were content. You had this calmness about you that I couldn't understand. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. And now, seeing you here in that chair, it just proves I was wasting all that energy tearing someone down who was building something beautiful. Her honesty disarmed me. I'd expected excuses, not confession, I said quietly. I appreciate you saying that. There's more, she whispered. I'm in trouble. Financially. I made some bad decisions, credit cards, investments, loans I shouldn't have taken. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed, but I can't. Her voice cracked then, and she pressed her hand to her face. I don't know why I'm even telling you this. Maybe because I don't have anyone else. For a moment, I didn't say anything. My instinct warred between the satisfaction of poetic justice and the compassion I still believed in. Finally, I said, you're not the first person who's been in that situation, Claire. And you won't be the last. What matters is what you do next. She lowered her hand and blinked at me. What do you mean? I turned my computer monitor toward her, showing her a document labeled Women's Financial Empowerment Program. Pilot Proposal. Her brows knit together. What's this? It's something I've been building quietly, I said. A new division focused on helping women understand finance, budgeting, investments, long-term wealth. It's part of the company's restructuring plan. I want it led by someone who knows both sides of that coin, success and struggle. Her eyes widened. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you purpose, I said softly. If you're willing to learn, to work hard, to help others avoid the same mistakes, then yes, I want you to lead this initiative. She stared at me, speechless. After everything I did to you? After humiliating you? I smiled faintly. You gave me the push I needed. Sometimes, the people who try to break us are the ones who forge us instead. Her lip quivered. I don't know what to say. Say yes, I said gently. She nodded slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. Yes. I extended my hand across the desk. Then welcome to the new Landon and Pierce. When she shook it, her grip trembled not out of fear, but gratitude. As she left, I watched her pause by my knitting basket on the corner of my desk. Her fingers brushed the soft yarn, a smile tugging at her lips. Guess I owe this thing an apology too. Yarn doesn't hold grudges, I said. It just keeps the pattern going. She laughed quietly and left, closing the door behind her. I sat for a long moment after that, staring out the window at the city below. My reflection in the glass looked different. Not just powerful, but peaceful. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about healing mine and everyone else's. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, my phone buzzed with a new email from an investor who'd been following my rise. Subject: Partnership, Opportunity, Global Expansion of Women's Financial Literacy Initiative. I read the message twice, my heart pounding. They wanted to take my program international. I leaned back in my chair, the sunset casting warm gold across the office. It struck me then the very thing they mocked me for, the hobby they ridiculed, had become the symbol of empowerment that would change lives beyond this building. And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear my younger self whispering, "You did it. You finally wove something that lasts." I never imagined my knitting basket would spark a movement. If someone had told me a year ago that my little knitting basket would one day represent financial freedom for women around the world, I would have laughed. But here I was, standing in front of a room filled with journalists, cameras, and business leaders, preparing to announce something that had started from the humblest corner of an office floor. The Women's Financial Empowerment Initiative had officially launched, and within weeks, it caught national attention. Articles appeared online calling me the Knitting Investor, a nickname that started as mockery and turned into a badge of pride. I stood at the podium, a soft pastel scarf wrapped around my neck, one I'd made years ago during those long, lonely nights after my divorce. It felt fitting somehow, like wearing a piece of my past into my future. Thank you all for being here, I began. When I first started working at Landon and Pierce, I was quiet. Invisible even. People saw the yarn in my hands and assumed that meant I lacked ambition. What they didn't realize was that every stitch I made was a lesson in patience, resilience, and long-term growth, the very principles behind smart investing. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward, listening. This initiative is about giving women, regardless of age, background, or circumstance, the tools to take control of their financial futures. No one should have to depend on someone else for stability. Not a husband, not a company, not luck. Behind me, a large digital display projected the new program's slogan, "Weaving Wealth, One Thread at a Time." The applause that followed was thunderous. I smiled, not because I needed validation, but because it meant people were finally ready to listen. After the press conference, I met with representatives from several major firms interested in partnering. One, a soft-spoken woman named Anita Morales, shook my hand firmly. "Your story is powerful, Olivia," she said. "You turned something ordinary into something revolutionary. It's just about seeing potential where others don't," I replied. "Whether it's in yarn or in people." Later that day, I returned to the office, where Claire was coordinating the next series of workshops. She was thriving in her new role, focused, driven, and more empathetic than I'd ever seen her. She'd become one of the best advocates for the program. "How'd it go?" she asked, glancing up from her laptop. "Better than I expected," I said, sitting across from her. "We're expanding faster than projected. By next quarter, we'll be running sessions in 5 states. Her eyes widened. "That's incredible." I nodded. "It's happening, Claire. The movement's real now." We both laughed softly. It still felt strange to say that word, movement. I'd never intended to start one. I just wanted to survive, to rebuild, to prove to myself that I could. But somehow, it had grown into something far bigger. A week later, I was invited to speak on a televised financial panel. The host introduced me as Olivia Hart, founder, investor, and advocate for women's financial literacy. Hearing those words almost made me tear up. As the cameras rolled, I thought back to that tiny cubicle, the laughter, the humiliation, the cold fluorescent lights, and now, here I was on national television, knitting calmly while discussing global markets and sustainable investing. The irony wasn't lost on me. After the broadcast, I received a flood of messages from single mothers, retirees, and even teenagers who'd watched the segment with their parents. They thanked me for showing them that power doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it whispers, quietly, persistently, until it's finally heard. That night, I returned home to my apartment, where my knitting basket still sat in its usual spot by the window. It looked exactly the same as it had the day I was fired, only now, it felt like an artifact of transformation. I picked up a new skein of yarn, soft ivory wool, and began to knit as I scrolled through my emails. Among the congratulatory messages was one that made my stomach drop. It was from an unfamiliar address, no name, no subject, just a single attachment and one short message. "Congratulations on your success. We'll be in touch soon. SEC, Investigations Division." My needles froze mid-stitch. For a moment, I thought I must have read it wrong, but the email was clear, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I set my knitting down slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I'd done everything by the book, hadn't I? The shadows of my past decisions, the hidden trades, the quiet accumulation, the whispers of power all flickered through my mind like scenes from a movie I'd tried to forget. I reached for my phone to call my attorney, but stopped. No. Panic wouldn't help. Facts would. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and whispered to myself, "You've faced worse. You didn't come this far to unravel now." Still, as I stared at that email glowing on my screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was about to test everything I'd built. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, unable to shake the image of that email. It sat in my inbox like a storm cloud, silent, heavy, threatening. The SEC Investigations Division didn't contact people casually. And though I'd been meticulous in every trade and filing, I knew that power, once visible, attracted scrutiny. For years, I'd operated in quiet corners, buying, selling, building my position like an artist painting in secret. But now, my success was public, my name in headlines, my story circulating across social media, and visibility meant vulnerability. I made myself a cup of coffee, hands steady but mind racing. What if Donahue had tipped them off? What if one of my investors had slipped up? No, that couldn't be. Every document was reviewed, every trade reported properly. Still, I knew the system didn't just investigate wrongdoing, it investigated potential wrongdoing. By 9 a.m., I was in my office, scanning through legal documents, cross-referencing everything with our corporate attorney, Martha Reyes, a woman sharp enough to read a contract like a surgeon examining an X-ray. When I showed her the email, she raised an eyebrow but didn't look alarmed. "They're not accusing you of anything," she said. "They're likely reviewing the buyout structure. Anytime someone acquires controlling interest this fast, it raises flags. It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure," I repeated softly. The words felt like a thread I was afraid to pull. Martha smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Olivia, you've done nothing illegal. But you might want to prepare for questions. They'll want to see everything: communications, transactions, group partnerships. Be transparent, and this will blow over." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her confidence. Still, a tiny part of me couldn't relax. I'd spent so long building this empire in silence, in secrecy. Now I had to hand over the keys and hope every stitch held. Later that day, I received an official letter confirming what I already knew. The Securities and Exchange Commission requests your cooperation in an ongoing inquiry related to recent shareholder transactions at Landon and Pierce Associates. My staff didn't need to know the details, but rumors spread quickly. By lunchtime, whispers buzzed like gnats in the hallways. I saw them glance at my office door, not with malice, but with that familiar curiosity people have when they sense blood in the water. Claire was the only one who didn't whisper. She knocked softly on my door, closing it behind her. "I heard," she said quietly. "Of course you did," I said, forcing a smile. "The walls here talk more than the employees." She hesitated before asking, "Are you in trouble?" "No," I said honestly, "but trouble has a way of following success." She nodded. "If you need help with anything, I mean going through records, files, I'll do it. You gave me a second chance. Let me return the favor." Her sincerity surprised me. "Thank you, Claire. I might take you up on that." As the Dole investigation unfolded, I provided everything: financial statements, group messages, contracts, even my old handwritten notes. The agents were polite but clinical, their expressions unreadable as they combed through months of data. Weeks passed. Each day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing leadership, public scrutiny, and the quiet fear that one oversight could unravel everything I'd built. The media caught wind of the inquiry, of course. Headlines surfaced. Knitting investor faces SEC review. Landon and Pierce takeover under examination. But the coverage wasn't cruel, more curious than accusatory. And I refused to hide. I attended every meeting, every interview, every internal review. I answered every question clearly, calmly, truthfully. When one of the investigators asked why I'd chosen to disguise my early financial work behind knitting patterns, I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Because," I said, "people only see what they expect to see. That's how I survived long enough to get here." Even he smiled at that. After nearly a month, the inquiry concluded. The official report stated there was no evidence of misconduct or violation. They even commended the transparency of my records. When Martha called to give me the news, I closed my eyes and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "You're cleared," she said warmly. "Congratulations, Olivia. You did everything right." That evening, I walked home instead of taking a car. The city felt different, not brighter, not softer, but steadier, as if it had finally accepted me. I passed a knitting shop downtown, its window filled with colorful yarn. I smiled. At home, I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and picked up my knitting. The needles clicked quietly in the dim light. Each sound felt like punctuation, the closing of one chapter, the beginning of another. There was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Mrs. Callahan stood there, holding a basket of cookies. "I saw the news," she said proudly. "They cleared you." I knew they would. I laughed softly. "You never doubted me, did you?" "Not for a second," she said. "People who build with patience always outlast the noise." Her words warmed me more than the wine. When she left, I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer against the dark. I thought about everything I'd endured, the mockery, the doubt, the fear, and how each trial had taught me to weave something stronger. The investigation hadn't broken me, it had polished me. Because even power, when built with integrity, can stand in the shadows and still shine. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the refinement before something even greater. Tomorrow, I'd be boarding a plane to speak at a global finance summit, and I planned to bring my knitting basket with me. When I stood on that stage, I saw every version of myself reflected in the Macon crowd. The auditorium lights were blinding. Hundreds of faces stared back at me, expectant, curious, inspired. Some held notebooks, others simply listened, eyes wide, like they were waiting for permission to dream bigger. I took a slow breath and gripped the podium, feeling the familiar rhythm of my pulse steady itself. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The SEC investigation had come and gone. The company was thriving. The initiative had expanded into 12 states, with international partners now joining the cause. And somehow, I'd gone from being the quiet girl who knits to the keynote speaker at the Global Women in Finance Summit. As the applause quieted, I smiled and began. "My name is Olivia Hart," I said. "And yes, I knit." Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm, not mocking. I waited for it to fade before continuing. When I first started at Landon & Pierce, I was 34 and just trying to rebuild my life after a divorce that left me with almost nothing. I was working an ordinary job, sitting at an ordinary desk, surrounded by people who believed I was ordinary. I paused, letting the truth settle. But here's what they didn't know. While they mocked me for my yarn and needles, I was quietly knitting together something they couldn't see, a future built on patience, learning, and belief. On the big screen behind me, the slideshow displayed photos of the early days, my desk, the basket, the old company logo. Gasps echoed through the room. "I used that same patience to teach myself finance," I continued. "I studied late at night, learned from failure, and invested what little I had. I didn't come from money, I didn't have mentors. But I had curiosity. I had determination. And I had time, the one resource most people overlook." I saw heads nodding. Women in tailored suits, young students, even a few gray-haired veterans of the industry, all leaning in, listening not just to a speech, but to something they recognized in themselves. "When I was fired," I said softly, "I thought it was over." But it wasn't an ending, it was a handoff. The universe was simply saying, "Your chapter here is done. Start writing your own book." So I did. Applause filled the hall. I smiled, continuing. "I built an investor group of women who had been told they weren't smart enough, strong enough, or bold enough to handle money. Together, we bought the company that underestimated us. And then we built programs to help others do the same." The next slide appeared photos of the workshops we'd launched. Classrooms filled with women learning about budgeting, trading, and investing. Some of them were single mothers, others retirees, others barely out of college. "This," I said, gesturing toward the screen, "is what success looks like when it's shared. True empowerment isn't about proving others wrong, it's about giving others the tools to prove themselves." Right. The crowd stood and clapped, but I lifted a hand gently. Before you applaud me, I want you to hear this because it's important. The room hushed again. Every single person in this audience has been underestimated at some point. You've been dismissed, ignored, laughed at, maybe even told you were too quiet or too soft or too late to start. But every great story begins that way, with someone doubting you. The secret is not to argue with them, it's to let your results speak. A tear rolled down a woman's cheek in the front row. I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. When they laughed at my knitting, I said, smiling faintly, I learned that sometimes the most unassuming things can hold unimaginable power. That basket they mocked, it became my armor. My trade reports, my dreams, my future, all hidden beneath the yarn they thought was useless. I reached into the small table beside me and lifted the old wicker basket onto the podium. It was worn now, its handle polished from years of use. The crowd gasped. This, I said, is a reminder that power doesn't always wear a suit or speak loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner, waiting for the right moment to be seen. The applause that followed was deafening, not just polite applause, but the kind that came from deep understanding. When it finally quieted, I closed with the words I'd been saving since the day everything began. I once thought I needed to fit into someone else's pattern to succeed, but the truth is, I was never meant to follow one. I was meant to create my own. So, to every woman who's ever been laughed at, overlooked, or underestimated, remember this. They mocked my knitting, but it was the thread that wove my freedom. The entire room stood as one, clapping, cheering, some crying openly. And as I stood there, smiling through tears of my own, I didn't just see an audience. I saw every version of myself, the broken one, the quiet one, the brave one, the victorious one, all standing together. Later, when the cameras were off and the lights dimmed, I walked backstage. Claire was waiting for me, beaming. You were amazing, she said, hugging me tightly. They'll be talking about that speech for years. I laughed softly. Good. Maybe it'll inspire the next woman who's sitting in some office right now, hiding her brilliance behind something ordinary. As we left the stage, I carried the basket with me, not as a symbol of my past, but as a promise for the future. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just knitting to hold myself together. I was knitting the world I wanted to see.